Minasan konnichiwa. Thank you so much for joining us today for our special webinar. My name is Yoshi Domoto. I'm the Executive Director of the Japan America Society of Georgia, and so thrilled you are joining us today to learn about the digitization of Japan. Certainly, Japan is Georgia's #1 foreign investor, as over 600 Japanese companies operate in our state, and these companies have invested about $11 billion in our state's economy and employ nearly 40,000 people. So there's a lot going on business-wise, certainly between Japan and Georgia, but pressures from overseas partners, fintech, the drop in Japanese population, and generational change have made digital transformation in Japan inevitable. So definitely, we're going to be learning more about how Japanese businesses and the landscape in Japan is changing with the emergence of digital technology and what practices are succeeding. Today, we are featuring Professor William Baber from Kyoto University. In the webinar, we'll present practical and theoretical cases on how Japanese industry is adapting or not to changes in digital technology, exposing gaps and strengths in digitization in Japan. But without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator and the co-chair of the Programs Committee of the Japan America Society and Associate Director of Georgia Tech Cyber Center for International Business, Education, and Research, Mr. Jim Hoadley. Hoadley sensei, yoroshiku onegaishimasu.
Yoroshiku onegaishimasu. Thank you, Yoshi. Well, I certainly don't have to introduce myself because you've taken care of all of that for me. I appreciate that. I do work at the Center for International Business Education and Research at Georgia Tech, and through that position, I have come to know Will Baber. Hopefully, he's okay with me calling him Will.
Of course.
And I have to say that he is both a scholar and a very wonderful person, and we're very honored to have him join us. We're here to discuss the book, which Yoshi gave you the full title for, Transforming Japanese Business, Rising to the Digital Challenge. And for me, the fascinating thing about this is that it is very practical. For an academic tome, it touches on true stories rather than focusing only on theory, although there is certainly some of that there as well. And so we're going to be able to listen to Will talk about stories of companies that he has actually interacted with in Japan, particularly small and medium-sized businesses, particularly ones that are family-owned, who have had to embrace the digital nature of the world going forward, because a lot of small and medium-sized businesses in Japan, as they have around the world, have gone out of business because they have not adjusted to the new, to use an old word, paradigm. So Will is both one of the editors of this volume, and he's also author or co-author of several chapters. So you're not here to hear me talk, you're here to hear Will talk. So I will turn it over to him, and we'll come back for questions and answers. If you do have questions during the presentation at any time, please use the Q&A tool at the bottom, and we will try to answer as many of those questions as we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim. I will share my screen and get going. The topic today is specifically about small and family businesses. The book that I co-edited is about various kinds of businesses and society at large and what's happening there. So today we're taking a little bit more focus look at what's going on. And I'm going to talk mainly about these 5 companies, and then in the Q&A time, we can get broader and talk about more things. So these are Hoso Kimchi Masamune Sake, Sawaya Matsumoto Sake, Ippo Tea, and a company called Hilltop, which at first glance doesn't look very Japanese, does it? But the first 4 are older companies, and they're all family owned, and they fall into the category of medium-sized businesses. So they're particularly interesting because they're very old and traditional, but they have moved they've moved part of their business or their product or something forward into modern times with success. It was a big challenge. So Hoso was founded in 1688, and they were a weaver, kimono weaver in the Nishijin Ori district here in Kyoto. And this industry, as kimono has gone out of style, of course, and people wear Western clothing pretty much all the time, the market has gone down and down and down, and they've moved from being what was a luxury item to an item that's seldom worn. It's worn for very important occasions and in certain kinds of situations and so on. So they were able to modernize a couple of things. One was the technology. So they worked on digitalization of weaving techniques, and they built this into the software that they themselves developed. So this was in-house material. They didn't in-house design and engineering. They didn't go out and outsource this. They didn't have to do a technology transfer. They also didn't have to create a division of engineers or something. This was a do-it-yourself kind of thing. So they had the expertise to operate some numerical control machines, but these things age and have to be updated. So they took the step further to develop artificial intelligence software to make it possible for them to do more complex, more demanding designs and put them ahead of the competition. So when we're talking about fabrics, we have to think about not only how it looks, but how it wears and what you can do with it and how it feels. So there is a physical texture to traditional textiles that's very important. And this is something that they incorporated in their philosophy from already before this development and change, was the tactile, customized individual nature of those kind of crafted textiles. And they want, in their philosophy, is to connect humans to the past and the present, partly with that physical touch. And if you want to learn more about this company, of course, I've put the website here, but there is a Harvard-style case written by one of my colleagues in Kyoto, who is Professor Sugai at Doshisha University. And this is a very good case, so you can get really into the detail of that company. And as an example of how successful they are with their change, here is their new building at the new site. This is just a couple years old. And this is outside of the Nishijin neighborhood. This is closer to downtown. And what you see here is so dramatic and elegant that it's hard to even get your eyes on what this big black, super elegant, up-to-date building is. And that's a very visible sign of success, that they've made this transition. And part of their transition has been not only the technology, but they expanded their business model to reach luxury makers and luxury buyers overseas. So you'll find their textiles in the interiors of crafted Rolls Royces, for example, and other kinds of one-off, very special kinds of products. And of course, if you're looking for that gorgeous Jackie Onassis clutch purse, they've got one for you. So you can visit their catalog online and get an idea about this. So the second company that I want to briefly introduce is Kimchi Masamune. So this is a sake maker. It's something I'm always interested in talking about and tasting. And also an older company, 1780s. And they have modernized the company to expand a little bit from sake into hospitality and in particular craft beer. So craft beer is developing quickly in Japan, not as far along as it is in the United States. So the older crowd among the listeners will know that 1970s and 80s beer landscape in the United States was terrible, flavorless, and uninteresting. And now it's completely revolutionized. So Japan is in this process too. And Kimchi Masamune is participating. So this is not a small step. So I don't want to suggest that it's just a new product or something or a new experiment. This is requires different controls, different systems, different expertise, new staff, new location, and so on. So in the course of history, the sake production moved out of the center of Kyoto City to Fushimi, with most of the other big sake makers in the city. But the beer is made on site downtown in Kyoto. So when you visit, you can see their museum, their original building, and have beer that's produced there. And I want to mention their philosophy too, because they also have a distinct philosophy that is to contribute to what you see here, contribute to people's happiness and be very customer focused, customer oriented. And they are fundamentally tied to the culture and the flavors and the food and the eating culture and drinking culture of the city of Kyoto. So, their philosophy is customer focused and uniquely Kyoto's. And here's an image from inside their production facility with a pleasant looking glass of beer. The third company that I want to mention is Sawaya Matsumoto. This is also a sake maker, also about a little more than 200 years old. And they are combining, in terms of technology, they are combining traditional manual methods of sake making with up-to-date controls. So on the one hand, they retain the labor-intensive and very physical work of mixing sake at the right speed, at the right temperature, at the right time, with technology that's really required to monitor and maintain things like temperature, aeration, oxygenation, and so on, to get the exact flavor that they want, and to work with the really minute differences that come with the crop of rice every year. So they're integrating and bringing together, very traditional, centuries old work with technologies, including distributed sensors, Internet of Technologies kind of work to make the product. And again, I want to mention the philosophy, and I'll explain later why I think this is all important. But so their philosophy is in three parts. One is to preserve tradition, and that's the physical part of the work, the manual part. And the second part is to break that tradition. So you have to then consider what parts of the tradition you need to keep or remove or adjust, and how that's going to work with your product, your quality, and your market. And then the third part is to create new value that comes out of that. So this is a philosophy that is one that you have to, it's not quick and easy to grasp. And I think this is true of any good philosophy. It's one that you have to internalize and when you internalize it, it becomes part of your thinking and your operating, and that helps to drive your innovation. So when we look at I chose the picture of just a label because you can see this is very modernist. So if we look at most sake labels, they tend to have traditionally Japanese kind of minimalist calligraphy, and sometimes there will be art that's usually from 100 or 200 or years ago or older, and there'll be those kind of themes. So this looks more like a wine bottle, but super minimalist. So it's a nice, particularly nice realization of Japanese aesthetic and modernizing what the customer expects and what the customer thinks about the product. So this is a great place to visit. So when Kyoto is more accessible for visitors in the near future, we hope, I do recommend going to Fushimi and visiting Matsumoto in particular. And the fourth older company I want to talk about is Ippo. This is a tea company. And tea is a little bit like textiles and kimono and sake in Japan. So the market is declining. People generally, the consumers in the general public don't understand so well the culture around these things, including tea. And they don't know so much about the flavor and handling and drinking of it. So tea is completely a mass commodity, and you can go to any vending machine and get a cold drink of tea anytime. So, you know, this is different from kimono, for example, but similar in that it's not so much valued as it was previously. And Ippo, their reaction to dealing with the commoditization and the lower understanding and the decreasing market, you know, as Coca-Cola or what have you takes market share, and coffee takes market share. Of course, Japan is a very big consumer of coffee. Their reaction was to move up and to move up the market into premium market, and also to include the experience of tea in the drinking and selling of it. So they opened shops outside of Kyoto, all around Japan, and also overseas. So there's at least one in New York City. And their goal here was to get inside the thinking of current day tea drinkers and access what they wanted to know and what they cared about. So, you know, one of the things when I talk to my Japanese students about tea, I say, you know, what is tea for? And then they're like, okay, it's when you're thirsty and you need some refreshment. But for example, they don't think about the concentration benefit of tea drinking. So one of the reasons that tea became popular in the monasteries of Japan was that during meditation and during long days of learning or working on manuscripts and so on, tea was a way to stay alert and stay focused. So this idea of tea as a focusing drink or concentration drink has really diminished, which, you know, if you went back in time and said that to someone 200 years ago, they would be completely shocked, because that's the whole point of tea, or, you know, one of the main points. So the company had to do a deep dive, or continually does a deep dive into what tea drinkers think and want. And they also educate the tea drinkers. And they do that through workshops in the tea salons, and this has become central to the mission of the company. So their philosophy is that you have to adapt, but you also have to remain devoted to what the top quality of tea is. And here's a picture of their building. So you can see that they're really happy to rely on the traditional look. This is a Meiji era building, and it really looks it. So it's dark and wood and not flashy, but it has its own identity and elegance. And when you walk down the street, this is on Teramachi in Kyoto. When you walk down the street, you immediately recognize and identify. There's the ugly modern building next to it, and here's the cool traditional one. And in the morning, when they open up the sliding doors that you see in front there, the inside is neat, clean, minimalist, pleasant, and there are well-informed clerks working there to package and sell the tea. And of course, having a well-informed salesperson or a clerk is not the way modern retail business works. But they've got it, and they're very successful, and the customers appreciate this. So these are these more traditional older companies, and now I want to switch focus to Hilltop, which is a lot newer, a lot more recent. And when you look at the name Hilltop, you think, is that Japanese? What's the connection here? Well, it was founded as Yamamoto Seiko, Yamamoto Precision Engineering. And, excuse me. It was founded as a company that did what we now think of as traditional, conventional precision machine tool cutting. So they produced the small parts that went into cars and aircraft and Shinkansen, for example. And these were very typically screws or fasteners, brackets, and they would not make a small number of them. They made as many as possible and tried to get as big an order as possible. And the company has changed since then. Since 1980, it's gone through three, it's now just has finished its third transition. So the grandson of the founder is now the head of the company. And here's the level of success achieved by the second leader, who has just retired. So you can see that they went from a small machine shop doing work that was uninteresting, repetitive, dirty, where the workers are handling the materials and standing at a lathe, and there's oil around and volatile chemicals in the air and equipment and so on. Not a wildly dangerous environment, but also, an industrial environment. So it's a little bit on the side of definitely dirty, definitely dull, and a little bit dangerous. It's not ideal work. And one of the problems with this is that over time, you lose the creativity and interest and commitment of the workers. Of course, that's how humans are. And so as much as they might be devoted to the company and their coworkers, you're kind of squandering the human resources by being in a business like that. And another problem with this kind of mass production business is that prices tend to drift down over time. So even if there is inflation that makes the numbers bigger, your net profit margin tends to go down because the barrier to entry is low, and the big companies at the top of the production chain, at the top of the pyramid, are always trying to develop alternatives, and another company in another location. And then as globalization progressed, that kind of work went to developing countries with totally different cost structures. So we know how this goes, and it doesn't end well. So the second generation owner made a quite radical set of changes, and he moved the company from stage 1 to stage 2, from this precision manufacturing where they were, I have written here, second or third tier supplier. Really, they were like level 5 or 6. So they're making a screw, an object that goes into an assembly, that goes into another assembly, that goes up the chain, and then finally somebody puts it into a Shinkansen train or something like that. So he moved the company into a partly digitalized product, or partially digitalized system. So this meant that the workers had to change. So some of them left by retirement and attrition, and the younger ones and the more interested ones trained with the second generation leader as engineers, and they learned the software programming to use the computer-controlled CNC machine tools, and to get maximum kind of productivity out of them and maximum accuracy. And they totally changed from doing large amounts of a few kinds of items to doing small amounts of many kinds of items. And this was higher skill and higher value add. And it also put them in the situation that they could say no. And this is very important to Mr. Yamamoto, the second generation manager. So he focused on doing prototyping work that would be creative and interesting and difficult. And when they had opportunities to, when the company said, okay, you made one of them, you made a prototype, that's great, and now we need 10,000 of them, please take the contract. They said, no thanks. And they moved on to the next thing. So this, this is completely opposite thinking, and very forward thinking, and really taking control of the business. So in the third stage, there is more digitalization and another kind of strong approach to the market. I'll explain that in a couple of minutes. So that, that stage 1 precision machining is very standard. You have suppliers that make the tools, and you have equipment, and you have blocks of steel and material coming in. And with time, they began to focus on aluminum as a specialization. So that has to be handled differently than steel. It takes different tools and skills and more kind of personal know-how. But the outputs are very conventional here, and your contact with the end user is, you don't have contact with the end user. You're just going up the supply chain. In that second business model, that's much more interesting. The inputs are data, so or drawings. So the customer contacts you and they say, we need a thingy that does something, and it has to fit into this parameter in this space, and it's going to be about so big, and it's for a carburetor, or it's for a machine that makes something else, or it's going to be on a satellite that goes into orbit or something like this. And the engineer at the customer side gets into close communication with the engineer at Hilltop, and they work out all of the specifications and the details, and they sometimes co-engineer the piece of equipment, and then they make it. And the physical object is the output, so it goes into a box, and the delivery company takes it back to the customer. Right, so what have they captured in between? In stage one, they could capture some money. In stage two, they could capture a little more money, which is nice, but very importantly, they could capture the digitalized data around cutting the block of aluminum, any kind of finishing, and all of the knowledge around the engineering of the object and the product itself. So here they are gathering data over the course of 20 and then 30 years, 35 years, and so on, and amassing a huge amount of knowledge about the machining and the engineering. So some of this they can use to get better and faster, and some of it they can use to make the equipment work more efficiently. And they're also developing a lot of software engineering skills here. So we kind of, we know that Japan is very short on software engineering skills. And whereas in the United States, software engineers tend to make very high salaries and so on, here they may be seen as kind of run-of-the-mill engineers, and the capacity is not developing. But Hilltop recentered their business and their staff around this. Okay, so they've got this knowledge, and they've got skill set, and they've got a lot of data. So what are we going to do with that? And how does that impact the people, and why is that important? So let's not think so much about the product and equipment, or the raw product coming in and it gets worked on and it goes out. Let's think about this other supply that comes in. And this is challenges. So it's not that the phone rings and you pick it up and somebody wants 10,000 small widgets. It's that the phone rings and you grab it and you think, we're going to get some kind of weird thing that we've never had to do before. And who's it going to be? Is it going to be the space agency? Is it going to be Toyota? Is it going to be a food manufacturer? Is it going to be an artist? So they've even done some projects for artists that were extremely challenging. And what they take out of that is that the workers can be very satisfied with what they're doing and highly engaged, and they care about it, and the atmosphere is more of a design kind of a shop. But it's interesting. It's partly industrial, and there's a cutting floor and a manufacturing floor, and it's all very clean and high-tech equipment. But the attitude among the people is, we've got this problem that we have to solve, and we have to figure it out. So now we have engaged workers, and we've got a lot of data, and we've got a lot of skill. And the Mr. Yamamoto-san, who was the shacho, the head of the company here, is ready to retire. And his son is about 30, and it's time to push it, move it to the next generation. So what we have is a company that's very successful. You saw the nice building, and they're working on this kind of what we call a long tail business model. So you see on the left side, there's the number of products. That's mass production. So few customers, very high number of products. And on the right side here, you see it goes off thin, thin, thin. That's many customers, but they're only doing 1 or 2 products each. So they don't even have many repeat customers. Customers are very satisfied, and they talk about it and they spread the word to other customers, but they don't come back very often. That's just the nature of this business. So we've got the philosophy that built this model of the long tail challenges, small, very large number of customers, the engaged workers, is something like this. It's never to be bored. So the Yamamoto-san, he doesn't want dirty, dull, and dangerous. He said, we can't be bored anymore. This is not what humans do well. Humans need to take challenges and be interested. And that means they need to continually learn. So everyone who goes into the company gets a certain level of engineering experience and skill, even if they're basically hired as a marketing person, or whatever it is, and this also means that you have to create your future as it emerges. So the company is comfortable with a moderate level of constant risk taking. So to complete a project, they say, oh my God, we need this piece of equipment that we don't have, and it costs a huge amount of money. We're going to buy it. We do it, and we're going to learn it, and then it's there for the future, for the next project. And the way Yamamoto puts this together, his summary of this is that you have to nurture the human. So there's no focus on profit, even though the company is very profitable. And there's no focus on the customer, even though the customers are very satisfied. The focus is really on the workers, and everything else takes care of itself. So, this is kind of radical. Sometimes the other companies have, when he talks about this, Yamamoto has been on TV and so on from time to time, and very active guy. And other business owners say, they try to challenge him and say, you're not telling the whole story. That just can't be. But this is what he says day in, day out. This is what he tells his employees, his customers, his visitors, everyone, is nurture the human, keep them healthy, active, mentally alert, and you get great results. So we've got all this together. We've got a philosophy. We've got a company that's firing on all cylinders. We've got profits. We've got great quality. What's going to happen next? So the third generation, who has, as I said, has just taken over in the last year or so, is moving forward in a very to do something really big and kind of radical. So it's going to go from just doing the prototyping to managing what the customers want. Remember, we said that the customers would do a prototype, but when they said, please do the volume production, Hilltop said, no, thanks. Well, now they're aiming to direct that work to other companies. And this means that they have created and are expanding a platform for this kind of industry that can take the project from prototyping to mass production. And they get the benefit of knowing that throughout, and because they have that 35 years of raw technical data about cutting aluminum and manufacturing, they can now transfer precisely what is necessary to a different maker who can make it cost effectively and do it at whatever location is convenient. In other words, they are at the point where they are in a controlling position of the industry. So as this grows and develops in the next few years, you know, they're moving from a niche in the industry to a higher position in the industry. Pretty fantastic. So how do you get to all the, how do you get this kind of success, right? So as they're moving into stage 3, you know, they're profitable. They're better than just profitable. They don't have to do this, but they did, right? And they did it with some trial and error, but without any serious mistakes and without any big projects that failed and ate up a couple $1 million. So they did this very well. And they did this with a, they did it, you know, do it yourself, I think is a good phrase for this. And in academia, we call this effectuation, which sounds really cool, but it means do it yourself. And this means that they knew what their resources were and didn't overspend. And they didn't go to the banks. That's anathema to the Yamamotos. They didn't borrow. They didn't look for equity investments. They didn't hire in new high-skilled staff to kind of take over the company or something like that. They built their people up. They worked with what they had. They developed their network of contacts and let it evolve. They you know, they still had breakthrough ideas and concepts that came from themselves, right? So part of this was to set a challenge to the younger Yamamoto who was going to take over. And the challenge was from his father was, you go to California and found our first subsidiary in the US market. You go to America, not necessarily California, but, and the younger Yamamoto was like, well, I don't speak English very well. True, you know, okay, he didn't speak English terribly well. He didn't have this kind of experience, and he was mainly focused on the engineering. And this was the personal direct challenge. This is not a moonshot, you know, like trying to attain something totally wild and beyond belief. This is an attainable goal. Other Japanese companies have gone to California and been successful, small ones, big ones. There's a network there. Go do it, get on a plane, go find it. So he went there with a starter staff of just 2 people and himself, and you know, very limited language skills. And they found a location, they got their equipment, they got their permits, they got customers, and they got moving. And they took the stage 2 model to California, became successful. And at the same time, we're working hard on trying to understand what their next concept would be, that stage 3 kind of platform for the industry. And, you know, click forward 2 years, and suddenly the ideas are flowing. The personal network has been expanded from just niche industry in Japan to this much broader base of experienced Japanese American businesses and business people in and around California. So mainly they're in the LA area in Orange County, and so that's where their network is. But they have customers up and down the Pacific Coast and some from the East Coast. And even with COVID, their business has been about doubling the last 3-4 years each year. So this is a big success. And here's the gentleman himself. This is Mr. Yamamoto, who has just retired. And you can see this is how he looks all the time, right? So he's always kind of upbeat and engaged and focused, and he's always on message. And his message is always, do this, learn this, take the step, take the challenge, figure it out, do it, and stay engaged. And this is his son, the younger Yamamoto, Yuki-san, who is now the head of the company. And this, I have to say, there was a little bit of a personal journey for him. So he went from being kind of a quiet engineer over at that desk over there to, you see him in these pictures, he's also brimming with confidence here and moving the company into new uncharted space. And they're really good with that. It's really nice and remarkable to see. So they assembled that digital knowledge, intangible know-how, built it into their philosophy, and out of that comes really striking success. So these are some points that these companies have mostly in common. So they all have a philosophy, and it's not just kind of the airheaded, sounds good, soundbite kind of philosophy. This is internalized into the management and the workers. They have product and service innovation. So there's creativity going on. They've repositioned themselves, most of them have repositioned themselves in the industry. So they've gone from supplier to niche supplier, or they've moved somewhere else, or they've moved up or down into the industry somewhere. And at least 3 of these have taken on the new generation challenge. I'm not sure about the leadership at the 2 sake makers. I'm not sure where they are right now. And mostly they have some kind of digital aspect to them. So I should include that check mark there for Matsumoto too, because that's definitely, there's definitely a digital component there too. But this is, can at least say that having that digital component is a gateway to being able to do something bigger and better and different. So data and digitalized knowledge is a resource just as much as having clean water for your sake. So one of the really concrete lessons that I like to draw out of this is that if you're not digitalizing, you're not creating the resources that you need for the current happening generation of oncoming technologies like artificial intelligence and 5G everything and Internet of Things and highly connected optimization. So if you're not digitizing, you're missing something. And if you don't have a real company philosophy, you need to think about that and develop and understand why you're in business and what that means to your employees and customers, And that is going to help you not only survive, but thrive and make it into the next generation. Because generations are changing much faster now. So it's not just that you stand around waiting for the older person to retire. Technology generations are coming at the rate of 5 and 10-year gaps. And that means you invest heavily and you stay above water, or you're in deep trouble. Deep yogurt, as my father likes to put it. And nobody wants to be in deep yogurt. So some other lessons here, one is that the strategies for each firm have to be customized. You can't just say this works for everybody. So you have to understand what you have, what you are, figure it out yourself. The new generation has to be challenged and has to face some difficulty. And this repositioning is going to be important. And you have to know what your strengths and abilities are. And digitize what you do. So that's where I need to stop. I think Jimmy should have flagged me to stop sooner, and see if there are any questions or comments that I should deal with.
All right, thank you, Will. Great presentation. I do have several questions that I wanted to ask you, and let me just go with the first one, which is I wrote it down. Japan is home to some of the world's oldest businesses. Many of the businesses that you highlighted have been around for centuries, but there are several companies in Japan that have been around since the 700s. Nishiyama Onsen in Yamanashi, for example, has been operating for 52 generations. Is there something unique to Japanese companies that have allowed them to sustain this long?
One of the strategies for long-term, sustaining yourself very long-term, is not to grow too fast. So you can grow, you can shrink, but any manager will tell you that managing for growth is a lot easier than managing for decline. So if you need to, if you get 10% more work and contracts, you can hire 10% more people, or you can make your current people work 10% harder until you get the next level and then hire more people. But if you're declining, and you've got a staff of 100 people, you can fire 5 or 10%, and then it gets very difficult. When you have 10 people and you fire one person, you're looking at real trouble, and you can't fire half a person. So careful growth is one of the strategies that we see in shinise companies, not overgrowing, not overexpanding. And another strategy would have to be a really broad basket of strategies, is how do you handle your transition from generation to generation. So there's a number of ways of doing that. Some companies, some of these very old companies are, the shares are distributed to family members, and then when the older person steps down, the younger ones, cousins, siblings, what have you, come together and they elect someone who has to then buy out the others, step by step or in blocks or what have you. And then there's the strategy of adopting a competent son or putting it into hiring managers that will keep certain elements of it, so on and so forth. So what you don't have are crisis moments like Twitter has just faced. So, Twitter, it's not a family business, and it's a listed shareholding business, but to a large extent, it was Jack Dorsey's baby, and he's forced into handing it over, and somebody's going to take it who does not have his ideas about his philosophy and his ethics and so on and so forth. So basically that's a catastrophe. And these small, older companies are very, very cautious and successful at avoiding those kind of crises.
Okay. Great.
That's a short answer to a tough question.
I have a question from Bindu Arya, one of our participants this evening. I'm going to do my best to ask it. Are Japanese firms beginning to use open strategy involving internal and external stakeholders in the strategic planning process as they make these transitions?
To a limited extent, yes. So I can think of some smaller technology companies that are doing this, and maybe a good one to put a name on is a artificial intelligence company called Hackerus here in Kyoto. The bigger companies have talked about this, and they open consortia for like the smart city consortia that, you know, Toyota has one, and there's another consortium around Sharp, I think. But it's not really in their DNA. They're not very comfortable with it, is my feeling. So there's still it's very natural for engineers at a Japanese company not to go to a barbecue with their friends and talk shop. Now, that's part of that open innovation thing in the US and some cultures, is that, yeah, people do go and chat. They go to the same bars or the same this or that or the other. They have their hobbies. They meet other people and they chat maybe more than they should, and they share a lot of information. This is really good for the industry. It's not happening very much except in maybe smaller, up-to-date companies here in Japan.
All right. Well, let's see. Okay, now we don't have any other Q&A. Let me ask another question, which is actually related to something that I've noticed myself, related to Japanese small and medium-sized companies in particular, not necessarily the ones that you've had, but a lot of the ones that you've highlighted have products that seem like they would be in demand outside of Japan. And the companies that you highlighted in general, they've embraced the digital world, but there are lots. There's so many that don't sell outside of Japan that there's actually a cottage industry for firms that will act as go-betweens. It's like you want to buy some Japanese product and you can't get it, and we'll buy it for you so that you have a Japanese address to ship it to, and then we trans-ship it to you and we handle all the payment and all this sort of thing. This to me seems very wasteful for Japanese firms, that they're missing out on a lot of opportunity. They could be attracting a lot more foreign customers, because every time that you put a barrier to a customer to acquiring your product or service, you're going to lose people. What are the major impediments that are keeping these other firms, which have obvious overseas demands, from selling directly to them?
There's a lot of barriers there. So one of them is still the language barrier. And this is certainly improving as automatic translation is becoming a thing. But there are structural barriers beyond that, like banking and payments. So this is still relatively difficult. The major Japanese banks are not retail friendly, and they're not even terribly friendly towards smallish business transactions and this kind of thing. And there is, every year I tell myself that the sense of desperation is increasing in Japanese industry regarding the decline of the Japanese market. And it's probably true, but it's still glacial. So there is a sense, I believe, for plenty of small and medium companies that they will just simply ride the decline. And, they can still eat, and they'll just let it go. And at another generation, it'll be gone, whether it's a decade or 2 decades out or something, which is a terrible shame, right? And so I think there's a slow transition of the old guard, And there is a new generation certainly coming on that thinks differently, but they face all the barriers that a young generation faces. You know, they have lack of capital, lack of experience, lack of network, and the existing companies have low confidence in them. So yeah, this is the past 10 years have been a transitional decade for Japan, and the next 10 years will be too, and they will move faster and it will be harder.
The glacier is melting from global warming, as it will.
Yeah.
All right. I see Yoshi, and I also am looking at the clock. I believe we've reached the end of our time. It was a fascinating talk. Thank you very much. And applause. You may not be able to hear folks, but I'm definitely applauding you here. And I think they are as well. Thank you for sharing your time with us and your expertise.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I will, audience members can send me an email and get in contact with me, okay? All right, thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Oh, okay.
Great, thank you again, Professor Weber, for sharing your expertise with us. We certainly learned a lot. Again, for everyone tuning in, you can learn more about the fascinating kind of world of digitization of Japan, and through his book. You can purchase his book on Amazon, certainly, and also through his website as well. So all the websites and kind of the links to his book are on the chat box, and we'll be sending that out by email as well, along with a survey after this program. But another virtual round of applause for Weber Sensei. Thank you very much, Professor Weber. And I look forward to maybe hopefully visiting you in Kyoto, and then hopefully you can visit us in Atlanta and Georgia at some point as well. But thank you again for Professor Weber for joining us, and look forward to seeing you all again next time. Thanks so much. Take care. Be safe.